I will be discussing whether or not child welfare directly contributes to the overrepresentation of Indigenous in the correctional systems. The result for kids in care is not a positive one, for kids in care are more likely to end up in the correctional system than they are to graduate from high school. The Indigenous youth, the outcomes are often worse, as they are removed from their community, which causes a loss of culture. This fused with the ripple effect of the intergenerational trauma caused by residential schools, colonization, and the 60s scoop, where there was a mass removal of Indigenous children from homes where they were placed in non-Indigenous homes. This often led Indigenous youth into the young offender system, where Indigenous youth make up about half of the population of kids currently incarcerated in the correctional systems in Canada.
Yeah, so here's the thing. The Office of the Correctional Investigator long ago addressed this kind of myth that we're just more criminal. Inherently, by nature of our culture, we're more criminal. We know that is not the case, that this is a direct result of colonization, and not far off colonization, but the ongoing colonization. So, you've got the legacy of residential schools and 60s scoop, but you also have the current legacy of, poverty, dispossession, racism, and violence in our society. Kids in foster care, and these are the underlying causes. But along with that is also the racially discriminatory, purposeful, and chronic underfunding of federal programs and services that the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal has said is the #1 reason why kids are in foster care. Yeah. Well, if you look at the makeup of the kids that are going into corrections, more than 2/3 of them came from the foster care system. So Canada has created a pipeline direct from foster care into prison, also into human trafficking, into murdered and missing Indigenous.
In Manitoba, the situation is far worse. Justice Minister Cliff Collins says the province has the highest rate of youth in custody, about 4 times the national average, and about 90% of those youth are Indigenous. A recent review of admissions at the Manitoba Youth Centre showed that about 60% of the youth charged were involved with child welfare.
It's my firm belief that the foster care system is working the way it's designed, as a machine to destroy indigeneity. And we need to look at restructuring it, and we need to look at how the system is removing Indigenous children from Indigenous mothers when, an Indigenous mother may receive $600 on welfare to feed her children. The foster care system can say that's not good enough. Take the child and put it in a home and give that home $1,800 to feed those children. So they're giving more money to non-Indigenous parents to feed Indigenous children, and they're not supplying Indigenous parents with any support.
Indigenous women in prison. In the past 2 decades, the number of Indigenous women in the prison population has jumped from 10% to 40%, stemming again from the effects of residential school colonization and the continued forced removal of children. This has continued to putting more and more Indigenous people behind bars, particularly women.
2% of those women have children under the age of 16, and a little more than half of these mothers in prison are the single parents of their home. So it makes me wonder what is happening to these children.
In late February of 2019, the Government of Canada introduced an act, Bill C-92, an act representing First Nation, Inuit, and Métis children, youth, and families.
This to me is very simple. Indigenous children and youth have the right to be raised as proud First Nations, Métis, and Inuit citizens. Children's well-being, resilience, and their self-esteem depend on a secure personal cultural identity. What we are doing with this proposed legislation, it enables, as you've heard, Indigenous communities to support their families and keep their children in their communities according to their laws, traditional practices.
The Act states they will affirm the inherent rights of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples to exercise jurisdiction with child and family services. Will establish national principles such as the best interest of the child, cultural continuity, and substantive equality. Represents a historic opportunity to break free of the past and focus on the safety and the well-being of Indigenous children and youth. Is a concrete step towards reconciliation.
Worst part of it is that these kinds of stories are taking place all over the country. Families that have been separated in cases where the parents did not have their rights respected. And this is a big part of why we are working across the country with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis to see a complete overhaul of how child welfare works in this country.
In reading the facts and looking at the numbers of Indigenous youth in care and in child welfare, Indigenous youth currently make up 50% of children in care. The real number is said to be closer to 70%. Again, the reason being that Indigenous youth make up 38% of children living in poverty, while again only making up 7% of the youth population in Canada. In conclusion, I do believe that child welfare directly contributes to the overrepresentation of youth in the Indigenous in the jail system, as well as Indigenous male and women in the correctional systems. I do believe that changes are coming. However, these changes are going to take years and years to again work and change the system that is having a breakdown and a crisis right now. And I do appreciate the new steps and things being taken to change and address the situation. I do have a positive outlook and hope that things will be better for the Indigenous in the future.
I just don't understand their thinking and how all of this could have happened. How it could have happened across this country and nobody knows about it. You know, how many children were hurt, were damaged.
That building represents all of us collectively. This is what happened to all of us here. And it didn't happen just to the kids, it happened to the families. It happened to all of us, right across the nation, nation and nation.
There's something that's mighty wrong in this country that can allow hundreds and hundreds, thousands of children to go through these schools. And for people to say, get over it. You can't get over it. You can deal with it, but I don't think you ever get over it. Never.